And I sat in the pits and thought of all the people that I knew who had been injured or could not ride. I thought, I can't sit here. I have to get back on the bike.
Welcome to Champions Mojo, a podcast to bring out your inner champion. Your hosts are sisters-in-law, Kelly Pallas and Maria Parker. Kelly is a former Division I head swim coach, Olympic trials qualifier, and holds national and world records in masters swimming. Maria holds world records in endurance cycling and won the world's toughest bike race, Race Across America. Both are certified health and life coaches. Our goal is to inspire you through conversations with champions. And now your host, Kelly Pallas.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo podcast, and I can't wait to welcome my co-host, Maria Parker. Hey, Maria.
Hi, Kelly. How are you today?
Just doing great. And Maria, as you know, we are in for a real treat today, as our guest is a world record-holding endurance cyclist. He was never a competitive swimmer, though recently he has added swimming to his workouts. I can't wait for our listeners to hear his amazing story about a full recovery from a broken neck. He has also got quite a resume, which includes having been a visiting lecturer at Oxford. He's an author of multiple books, including 2 books of poetry, and a renowned expert on doing business in the digital age. Our guest, Jeffrey Ritter, has worked at the UN and has testified before Congress. But Maria, before we bring in your fellow endurance cycling champion, can you tell us a little bit more about Jeff?
Sure, Kelly. I'm so delighted that my friend, Jeffrey Ritter, is coming on the show today. He's the current overall world endurance recumbent cycling champion. At the 2019 Borrego Springs 12-hour World Time Trial Cycling Championships, Jeffrey completed 181 miles in 12 hours. Jeffrey has overcome enormous odds to live out his dream of becoming a champion cyclist. He's currently living what he calls Life 2.0, but we'll let him tell us more about that. Jeffrey, so glad to have you on Champions Mojo. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to spending some time with both of you.
Yes, welcome, Jeffrey. So, Jeffrey, tell us about what does Life 2.0 mean? What's the story behind that?
Well, back in the early part of this decade, 2011, 2013, I made 2 trips to the French Alps to fulfill lifetime dreams. To ride in the French Alps, to put your wheels on the same roads where those names of legends have been painted, and to conquer the mountains there. And coming back home after the second trip, where I had actually ridden the full stage of the tour solo, I thought, well, what's left? I was winning podiums in state and regional time trial champions for my age group. But what could I do to really up my game? I decided, inspired by those people that have raced the Race Across America, that I would try to qualify. After all, I was now 60 years old. And so we focused on a race qualifier that was out in Ohio, where I grew up. And it was really cool to contemplate racing on the same roads that I had learned how to love cycling. We got out there to do a training run, get familiar with the road. And 18 miles out, well, Life 1.0 came to an end. We don't really know what happened, but I was riding solo. My wife was so experienced, SAG supporting me behind me in a car that she'd stopped to get the day's waters. And when I came to, I had somehow fallen off a bridge nearly 23 feet. We think that probably I just hit a gap between the tarmac and the concrete of the bridge. It was out in the country, so there was a low guardrail, and somehow I must have lost control and gone over the guardrail. Looking up, it was like, what is this rusty underside of a bridge? I was riding my bicycle. Well, as it turned out, that was the beginning of Life 2.0. I survived, but my sternum had been broken in half on the boulder. A couple ribs were broken, but the real injury was that my head had whiplashed and broken over half the length of my neck. C5, C6, C7, T1, T2, all of them required attention over the ensuing days of surgery. Well, as I sat there on the gurney the next morning, having not almost made it through the night, the doctor asked before the first surgery, do I have any questions? And I looked up at him and I said, yeah, will I be able to fly to the University of Oxford to teach for the first time? And he had that kind of a look that we would use an acronym of WTF. And I looked at my wife and her eyebrows go up. And he said, when would you be going? Because he hadn't even done the surgery yet. And I said, well, 8 weeks from today. He squeezed my hand and said, let's make that your goal. And
Wow.
Indeed, 8 weeks later, neck brace still on, suitcase in one arm, laptop in the other. I insisted that I could get on the airplane, fly to London, and teach.
Wow.
Wow. Can you give us a little tighter timeline? What year was this? What month was it? And when you actually saw the underside of the rusty bridge, did you have feeling in your limbs? Were you in pain? Can you give us a little?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that too. How did you get help? Because you were invisible.
I'll try to do that. August 1, 2014, approximately 9:16 a.m., according to my Garmin, which actually recorded both my elevation over the guardrail and also the descent afterwards. To be graphic, we calculated that I hit the boulder with my stern at a physical speed of 26 miles per hour.
Oh, my goodness.
And when I came to, I heard vehicles on the bridge and realized they couldn't see me. How would I get help before I died? I could tell I was broken. The pain was intense, particularly on the left side. And I felt my cell phone in my back pocket had twisted. It was on my exposed right hip. And I said, well, okay, clearly something's broken. I could puncture a lung, I could sever an artery, but I have to get my hand down my side, pull the cell phone out, and try to call my wife. Otherwise, she won't find me. She could drive right past me. She may have already done so. And very slowly, I pulled the cell phone back up, looked at it, and realized I'd lost my glasses. So,
Oh, my goodness.
so I squinted, extended, and eventually found the way to redial. And that was one of the things that was so fascinating was here's this phone 20 feet under a bridge in Ohio connecting to a network that connected back to our home in Virginia and then reconnected back to my wife, who was in fact just 4 miles away in the car. And I said, I'm down. It's bad. I'm under a bridge. She had to find the bridge. So as it turned out, they put me on a gurney, put me on a backboard, put me on a neck brace, and took me up to the road. Helicopter came in, took me to the hospital, and of course, the first thing they do is in trauma is they cut all your clothes off. So here I am, an agile 60-year-old with a neck brace on in front of 25 doctors and nurses running around my body, and the doc next to me has the helmet that I had, and he says, to the recording, he says, helmet inspection has occurred. There's no evidence of visible impact on the helmet. But wow, this is a nice helmet. It's the same one I have.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, so you're pretty with it because you remember these details.
Oh, yeah. And I said, oh, do you ride just for fun, or do you race like I do? And he said, oh, I just ride for fun. What about you? And I said, well, I was training to race across America. And at that point, there was this whoosh in the room. And they realized they didn't have a weekend cyclist. They had a hard-ass athlete. Mm-hmm. And I think it changed the quality of the care that I received from that moment on.
Tell us about that. What do you think being a hard-ass athlete did for you in this circumstances?
It perhaps made me realize that I was a hard-ass athlete. 2 days after the surgery, the PT came in to see if I could take a couple steps up and down in their exercise room. And I did. The nurse said it was okay if I wanted to get out of bed, use the toilet, sit down in the chair. And I said, okay. I got up the steps, and then now I'm back in the room. And I get out of bed on my own and come back, and I'm going to sit in the chair for the first time. And I sat down. I said, hey, that's just like a squat. I don't have to just sit here, and I'm standing up and down, doing squats into the chair. And the nurse walks by and says, "What the heck are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing squats. I'm in recovery." And at that moment, the nurse, who had also held my hand through the first night, said, "Either you get back in the bed or I'm taking your gown off because you're not going to do this anymore."
Oh my
So
goodness.
and I mean, I've seen Jeffrey's X-ray, or part of it anyway, and now at this point after the surgery, you have a bunch of metal in your neck.
But it was titanium and carbon fiber, so I was lighter. Is so important to a cyclist.
I'm mesmerized by this. How do you break your neck in all those places and still have mobility? I just want people to have that info.
There were two surgeries, one from the front, where a U-bolt was attached to the vertebrae known as T1 and T2 in the front, essentially providing a platform for the rest of the work that was then done the next day by going in through the back. Two titanium rods are screwed into C5, C6, and C7. The disc between C5 and C6 was packed with cadaver bone so that it would all fuse. And C6 and C7 disc was pulled and replaced with cadaver bone to fuse. So C5, 6, and 7 are essentially one vertebrae held together with titanium. And the second answer is a lot of hard work. It's a miracle that I had mobility at all. The doctor said another 1/8 of an inch, and I would have been, in terms of the disc, and it would have severed the spinal cord enough that I would have been a quadriplegic. Had it gone to 1/4 inch, I just simply would have been dead. And so it's by those measures. But my left side was extremely weak and extremely uncomfortable. And all I can say is it just took nearly a year of physical therapy, weekly visits to my PT chiropractor to build and regain the space around the nerves that allowed my scapula and my left arm to regain most of their functionality.
Now, Jeffrey, I know that you had all intentions to get back on a traditional bike to continue your training.
Sure. Well, I never questioned that I was going to be riding again.
Right. So tell me what happened with that.
Well, the doctor had a great metaphor. He said after the surgery, he said, "Look, dude, Peyton Manning was told with his neck surgery he couldn't play for a year. So you stay off a bicycle for a full year." I said, "Yes, sir." And a week later, I wrote, "You mean on the road, correct?" He said, "Okay." And this was when the cycling application called Zwift had just come out. And so I was one of the early users because I could set the computer screen on the floor because I couldn't look up. My range of motion is still prescribed by the titanium rods, but I could look down. And I spent that year training on the bike, on the trainer, indoors, looking at the computer screen, waiting for the first anniversary. And good friends joined me, big day of celebration. And within 2 miles, I realized I could never ride a regular bike because I can't look up, which is also a good way of making sure I don't flirt with anyone that's taller than I am.
Now, you told a story once that I have just stuck in my mind about realizing, I think you were eating ice cream and with your wife in Durham, and it was a beautiful day, and I don't know when this falls in the timeline, but you were watching cyclists go by. Can you tell that story?
Well, to go back to your very first question, so weeks after all this, I'd come back from Oxford, and my wife had just retired from her federal career. And so we were just talking, now what? She has no job. I have a broken neck. And she just looked at me and said, "Well, we're starting life 2.0.
Nice.
And that's where it came from. And as Maria knows, that's tattooed on my arm, on my forearm, where I see it every moment of my waking days. So to answer your question, we then moved down here to where we now live in Durham, North Carolina, and unable to ride a bike. She was trying to, by now I'm really depressed, and said, we moved to a new home. I can't ride a bike. She took me to an ice cream store. We're looking out over the landscape, and there's this ribbon of road in front of us, and two cyclists are going down. And as you can tell, it was very emotional. A year later, having discovered recumbent bikes, I rode that same road, shouting, cheering, screaming with joy. I was riding again.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, so for those listening, like, a traditional bike, is formerly called a diamond frame, and even that can hurt your neck. I get a sore neck on a diamond frame. So the transfer to a recumbent for you was just the joy and the glory of having this. Can you describe your positioning and what it felt like, and how it's kind of put the fun back into biking for you?
Well, I saw this video of somebody on YouTube going up the same mountain I had ridden in France, the tallest one, called the Galibier, which anyone knows from Tour de France. And he was on a recumbent. And I thought, whoa. So recumbents aren't just for old people. These may actually be serious bikes. And then I read about these people that raced on recumbents, and they raced long. And as we know, Maria Parker had ridden the Race Across America and won on a recumbent. I thought, holy cow. And she's just 2 hours away from me. So I reached out to the Parkers, and they were gracious enough, based on the story, to lend me one of their bike frames, not the racing ones, but a more upright style, what was known as the Soft Rider, and said, see if you can ride this. I brought it home, and it took me 4 weeks to have the courage and find the balance to ride down my driveway. But once I crossed onto the street and found my balance, I said, we're going to do this. And so the bike that I now race on has a 30-degree seat, meaning that from the ground moving up, it's at a 30-degree angle. Not the most aggressive, flat, almost flat, but because I can't have the range of motion in my neck to say touch my chin to my chest, I have to have a higher seat angle, which means I just have to figure out how to make myself faster, even though I have more aerodynamic resistance than, say, someone riding the fully speedy recumbents. But once you find your balance, it's very easy to go and to then learn how to go fast.
What model are you riding, Jeffrey?
It's now the Silvio 3.0, which is the 30-degree seat.
Oh, yeah.
So again, I want to back up a little bit in case anybody doesn't understand. A recumbent bike is where you pedal out in front of you and you sit, rather than sitting on a saddle, you sit more like a chair. And they've been around for a long time, since the early part of the 20th century, but they're gaining in popularity now. And people know that I actually own and run a company that sells this product called Cruise Bike. And when Jeffrey came to our house in North Carolina and told us his story, we were, of course, very moved and hoped that we could help him, with our bike. And so we just said, hey, take this, take it for as long as you need it, take your time. We didn't want him to fall off and re-break his neck. So, but then Jeffrey sent me a little video kind of giving me more of his background. And of course, then I was really delighted when he got back to us and said, yeah, I like this bike. This is going to work for me. But then since then, Jeffrey's been doing some amazing things on his cruise bike, Silvio. Tell us about that.
Well, I figured if I fell off the bike training for going long hours and distances, I should figure out how to do that on the recumbent. And about 18 months after I got the bike, I entered my first 12-hour race, and it was about 104 degrees.
I remember that. I was racing too. It was horrible.
Yeah, it was very hot, but I got to the point toward the end of the day that I said, okay, that's enough. And I sat in the pits and thought of all the people that I knew who had been injured or could not ride. I thought, I can't sit here. I have to get back on the bike.
Yeah.
And so I got back and did another 27 miles before the end of the 12-hour period. And that was my first race. And I was completely hooked. Endurance racing is a team sport. It may seem like there's only one person on the bicycle, but behind that person is a coach and usually a crew of one or more people that are responsible for taking care of everything except pedaling the pedals. And that's true regardless of what kind of bicycle you're on. In my case, it was my wife who went from just driving a car behind me to make sure I had my water bottles to learning how to be an entire crew for an endurance cyclist. And so she's been a big part of that. And that was in 2017. And at that point, we continued to enter these 12-hour races. I engaged a coach, got stronger, lost weight, and have continued to now be competitive. So that last year, not only winning the world championship, but I also won the 12-hour U.S. national championship on the recumbent. So that was really nice.
Gosh, what a great comeback story. It's just so inspiring. What advice would you give to someone who might feel discouraged or even depressed when they have an enormous setback like your accident?
Since my own recovery, I've reached out to other cyclists who have suffered neck injuries. And I've said to them, everybody can talk to you about what it takes to come back, but only someone who truly has been there deserves to be listened to. Because, you can do this and it's the new normal and it'll take time to recover. But you need someone to say, dude, you only have one fracture to C1. I have 5, 6, 7, T1, T2, and I came back to winning championships. Get your butt going. And so I think that the trick after a serious injury is twofold. No one else can find the will to fight except the person that's been injured. You can be showered with love, cradled with affection, carried through the highest quality physical therapy that someone can imagine. But unless you want it, unless you intend to defeat the injury, you'll never get to where you want to be. The tattoo that I mentioned that's on my arm of Life 2.0 shows called Galibier, which, as I mentioned, is one that I've crossed on my own bicycle. And what I do is I show that tattoo to folks. I say, look, this represents the mountains of life I have conquered, but it also represents the mountains I will conquer. And you need to see them and decide that you will beat those mountains. Whether it's learning how to ride a bike on your back, whether it's finding out how to go in the water when you can't turn your neck, whatever it is, learning that you're going to race on a recumbent rather than a regular bike because that's the only thing you can do. You have to find that will to fight and to just simply say, no matter what the discomfort or the pain, whatever, what the obstacles other people see, you don't see them. You just are going to work through them and be on and get to the top of those mountains.
It sounds like that will to fight is really natural for you. And one of the things that we love to do for our champions is see things that they may just do naturally and they don't even realize it. I feel like one of the things that you used here that you're not specifically drilling down on is goal setting and visualizing and having that 2.0 and the mountains and the goal of getting back on the bike, the goal of going to lecture at Oxford. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what you were thinking about?
Good question. During the last year, when we're all going through the pandemic, a lot of athletes, including myself, had huge setbacks because our goals have been wiped away. Whether it was this race or qualifying for the Olympics or racing for this championship, suddenly they're empty. There's just a null, a void there. And what you have to do is recalibrate what that goal is going to be. It has to be a shorter term goal but you still then have to pursue the process. So for example, I come back from the other end of North Carolina with this bicycle on the back of my car that I'd never seen. And oh yeah, ride this down the driveway. Well, it took me 4 weeks to figure out how to ride that bicycle 200 feet. And yet that became the goal. Then it was the goal of going down to the cul-de-sac on our street and back, 200 yards. I remember posting on Facebook weeks after the accident and before I went to Oxford to my friends that I had just walked to the end of the corner of where our house was. And it was 500 meters and back. It was a full kilometer. And so the small steps become the goals. And in this time of uncertainty about other races, what's so critical is to reset those goals to those that you can reasonably achieve or irrationally achieve, but that are there. And so, for the injured athlete who's coming back, you have to think in those terms. And I told you about the PT having me walk a couple steps. The next day she came in and said, "You want to try some real steps?" And I said, "Of course." And she took me to the end of the hall. My wife was with us, and they wanted to make sure that I wouldn't fall, right? And so they're very carefully around me. And I'd now I then did 3 steps on the first day, and the next day I went up 3 flights of steps, and I said, "Do you want me to keep going?" No, she laughed and said, "I think you're done now. You're discharged from PT." So I think you have to reshape those goals. And even if it's gaining 5 seconds or 2 seconds in the pool or 10 watts on the bicycle or reducing your weight or whatever your objective is, thinking of them in reachable goals rather than just being overwhelmed by the void that's out there in the big picture.
That's terrific advice. Jeffrey, I know, as we said in the introduction, you've been incredibly successful in your professional life as well. How do you think the characteristics that allowed you to come through this, really tough injury and then go on to become a champion again, how do you think those overflow to your professional life or vice versa? Is this just who you are, or are these goal setting and process oriented mindset, or is that just something that you've developed over time, or is it something that's just part of Jeffrey Ritter?
Despite what the record of things I've done suggests, it was not an easy journey professionally. In fact, there were more than a few times when I had the professional equivalent of being knocked off the bicycle. I joke with people, I got fired a lot. Because I kept pushing the envelope on how to change things, and ultimately had the chance to do that at the United Nations. And the one thing that I think the injury and the recovery and the cycling over the last 10 years has helped me focus on is that what I didn't know I had until this all occurred was really an indomitable commitment to not defeat myself. Don't let your despair, don't let your depression, don't let your injuries, the fact that you just got fired, get in the way of your own confidence that you will be the very best that you can be. For me, I found usually, except on the bike, that was in service of others. But the bicycle gave me this one place where I could indulge in a little self-focus to be the very best that I could. And as you've already said, and it's one of the more gratifying aspects of this whole journey, is that it's in fact been serving others, because the story and the journey that I've had has inspired other people. That's why I've reached out to other crash victims on bicycles, because they want to know they can survive. They want to know that they can once again be strong. And so when I get back on that bike and I'm racing, I'm thinking of making sure that the story stays good and strong, that I don't defeat myself, because they need to hear that story too.
That's great. That's really beautiful, Jeffrey. I so appreciate that kind of intention. And and as an endurance cyclist as well, there's different things that you think about as you're going through. And if you're thinking of others, it's so much easier to keep on going. And I appreciate that you use that technique as well. But I think it's interesting to me that one thing that has to happen when you have a setback, when you get fired, when you have an injury, is sometimes your dream has to change.
Agreed.
And so, tell me about how that has borne out in your life.
Well, the cycling is a great example. I mean, the unexpected, take a step back. When I first went to the French Alps, I wrote a blog about a lifetime dream coming true. I started focusing on cycling as a high school kid and looking at the small print at the bottom of the sports section on the Sunday page that had these French names and French towns. I thought, wow, that's really cool stuff. And then you could actually see same day coverage on Wide World of Sports, and then see the live coverage as the new century began. And it was always calling me to go there. And that dream did ultimately come true in 2011 when I got to take my bike to France and race on those hills in the mountains, conquer those dreams. Yesterday, a friend of mine posted on Facebook, a young fellow, very wise in his age, not an athlete, but a great inspiration about remaining to stay focused on the dreams that you have. And I wrote back to him, but don't miss those treasures of your life that are the dreams you never had, but are the riches that make your life worthwhile. And, in my case, I got back on the bike. I found out I could still be an athlete. I mean, from the day I got back on the bike when I was 50 to today, I'm nearly 60 pounds lighter than when I was a middle-aged lawyer in a major law firm in Washington, D.C. I wasn't healthy. But today, the thing that all these experiences have added up to is maybe it's that my cucumbers are really doing well out in the garden. No, we don't have any races that we can compete in this year because of the pandemic. But there are other challenges that you can embrace in your sport that give you that drive at 6 a.m. when you kiss your significant other on the cheek while still they stay asleep, and you go to the pool or you get on the bike. And it's finding those other drives, but never forgetting that each day is so rich with things that we sometimes overlook, and keeping that perspective in mind. You may lose some athletic dreams, but my gosh, you're strong, you're fit, you're athletic, you're capable. Those are things you never really prioritized as your dreams, but you're so rare to be able to have those as attributes of your life. And I think it's one of the things that's helping a lot of us get through this, is realizing what we do have, not necessarily what that particular long-term dream is that got shattered by the illness.
Yes, Maria and I just had a conversation about this theme yesterday. Right now, we all want to get out of this moment. We're not in the present moment. We want the races to come back. We miss the swim meets. We miss the road races. We miss socializing with our friends. And It's so, it's going to pass. We're going to have, whenever this pandemic goes away and everything is back to normal, and it will go back to normal, we're going to look back, and Maria and I said, we promise there are going to be times that we're going to look back in the future and say, I miss that pandemic when I used to grow cucumbers, when I had the time to learn to knit. Yeah. And Maria said when she learned to bake sourdough bread, or you get more time with your family. So I think, it's a great sentiment, Jeffrey, and it kind of just encompasses exactly what Maria and I said. Maybe we need to do an entire show on that topic, because everybody wants out of now. They want to go, get back. But there are many riches right now.
And we don't know how our lives, this little turning point in our lives via the pandemic or anything else that happens, is going to open up new vistas. As you know, my sister got brain cancer and died. And that's what made me an endurance cyclist. I mean, I never dreamed of riding my bike 12 or 24 hours, but something happened and I had to do something different. And so, and I'm, that's part of who I am now. So it's, I think we will look back on this time and we'll long for our beautiful cucumbers.
Well, and it doesn't mean that I've given up cycling. I mean, the good thing for me was to actually re-engage with my coach in March. And I thought, well, everything's shattering, but I can do this by myself. But what I missed was the process. I missed the discipline of having someone I was accountable by posting my rides every day. And I'm fortunate enough that he was available and I was able to fit into his portfolio again. And I have to say that structure and accountability has really helped me get through this middle, because for the highly skilled athletes that you've had on this podcast that I've found inspiring, one of the things that keeps coming back is just get in the pool and do it. Just get out on the bike and do it. Don't think, just do. And that's how we find happiness. That's how we find joy. That's how we find the energy to confront the other challenges of life.
Well, Jeffrey, you've been so successful in your profession, in cycling, in recovering. You've obviously touched on several characteristics that have made you successful, from, your goal setting and your massive drive and your persistence. What other characteristics do you either have that we haven't talked about, or ones that you think champions generally share?
I think the thing that we haven't talked about that is important is your willingness to expose yourself to suffering. There are exercises and routines and interval sets that any endurance athlete gets that there's no way to describe it. They just suck. You see them on your calendar and you think, oh God, Thursday is going to be a nightmare. Your coach says, I want you to do a 5-hour workout and I want you to hold a certain speed or certain power for 5 hours. And you think, this is going to be awful. Last year, before we started racing for nationals, I was out in Louisville and had the good fortune to visit the Muhammad Ali Center. I'd always admired Ali, but there was a quote of his on the wall that just seared itself onto my brain and my heart. And what he said was, I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion. Right. My knees almost buckled. And as we left the center, I noticed on the counter, they were selling necklaces. And on the necklace is a red bicycle. Well, this is a emblem of Ali, because when he was 12 years old, someone stole his bicycle. And he was told the officer about it and said, I was going to go whoop that guy's butt. And the officer said, do you know how to fight? And Ali said, no, come to the gym tomorrow. If you're going to whoop his butt, you might as well do it the right way. And so that red bike that he lost at age 12 was the one thing that drove him to become a world champion. And so at the national championships and also at the worlds, tucked beneath my jersey was that necklace. And it was my reminder that no matter what I was feeling at that moment in the race, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours in the desert heat, if I kept suffering and worked through it and ignored it and found more strength in my heart to just keep going, then whatever they said on the podium, I knew that for myself.
Oh, gosh. I love that. I had never heard the Ali story and the willingness to expose yourself to suffering. I love that. And Maria, this is Conversations with Champions, and you too, Maria. I think you endurance cyclists, you guys are just in a different league. I've suffered on endurance, but not to the level of 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. Maria, could you just meld your voice with Jeffrey's and tell us how you suffer, because that's you say that's your superpower, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I think Jeffrey touched on it, and I sort of emphasized it earlier. It's hard to do this for me. It was hard to do this for personal glory. I mean, I love personal glory. Don't get me wrong. But in the worst of it, just for a title or a place on the podium, you just wouldn't do it. It just hurts too much. But for others, it's helpful. So whenever I am really, really uncomfortable, my suffering is always offered. This is a very Catholic expression, but it's offered for those who are suffering and don't have anybody to stand beside them. So when I'm out there and it hurts like anything, and all I can think of is I want to quit, I think, no, I'm not going to quit, because I'm doing this for someone else. So that's one section for me. And the other part is, this is sort of a little known thing about me. I use rage. And I am so angry that people are dying from brain cancer or other cancers. I am so angry that the rage, I channel that rage. And so when I'm out there and something hurts and I'm like, Jeffrey, I'm doing some, really tough workout, I remind myself that every pedal stroke, every pain that I experience in my legs, in my lungs, in my head, wherever it is going out there to grind up, to cure brain cancer, to grind up cancer cells, I literally use that, and I think that you can channel rage. I would call it righteous rage, but I've used unrighteous rage before. In fact, some of my best rides are when I'm mad at Jim.
Those are those 1 hour rides that really.
Yeah. So, anyway, Jeffrey, would you agree with that or add to that?
Well, I was going to say, you've seen me. I somehow along this process, actually, my wife got a tattoo with a friend of hers, and I said, "Hey," she was like 55, and I said, "She can't be the only one in this family with a tattoo. I mean, I needed to get some." And one of the ones that I have is around my left bicep, and it's a bicycle chain link. Links of chain. Normally, you'll see the manufacturer's name on those links, but on mine, on each link is the name of one person who has been behind me in my cycling journey. My mother, my wife, my children, my coach. And I just saw him at lunch, and I said, "Ben, don't ever forget that your name is here right in my armpit. And every time I race, I'm taking it with you."
I love it. Maybe you need a link for cruise bike on there.
Yeah.
The logo definitely is going to get on the right calf.
Yeah, all right. I love it.
Cool.
I love it.
That's cool.
One of the people whose name there was a fellow that had inspired me to start back when I was 50. And his name's Craig Clark. And Craig was an amazing cyclist. He was also a doctor of some renown. And he was racing for the Mid-Atlantic Championship road race, came around the final turn. Something observers saw was wrong with his front wheel. He missed the turn, went head first at full speed into a light post and suffered traumatic brain injury. And while he lived on, he was never able to ride a bike again. And, I see Craig, and talk to him on a regular basis, but, his name is one of those. And tomorrow, for the first time, I'll be seeing him and showing him my world jersey that he inspired. And so that those people, as you can tell, they mean a lot. And all you have to do is think about them. But the other part of it is some words that were shared with me in the pit about 11 hours into a race where we were talking about, whether we stop again or something. And it happened to be Jim Parker, who looked at me and said, "You're a 12-hour racer, right?" I said, "Yeah." So gut it out.
Of course, he was sitting in the pit, so.
But, it comes back to just having that. You can have all the sources of inspiration that you can cite, but ultimately you have to reach into your heart and into your spirit and say, I am going to conquer this moment.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing I take back from cycling is there's nothing in my life now that ever really seems insurmountable. It's just another mountain. And if I show the tenacity and the will, I'm gonna get to the top of there and stand there just as I did at the top of Col de Galibier and so many other mountains and say, I beat you, and I am the champion today.
Awesome. Jeffrey, we try to keep our podcast to under an hour. We're getting close to that. And our last question that we love to ask people is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't asked you?
Embrace the day. I mean, I think that, whether you're on a bicycle or you get a chance to be in the pool or you just go for a walk, at the end of the day, look back on the treasures that day has given you and know that you have won so many things that day that did not exist when you first opened your eyes in the morning. I think it's just really vital that as much as we as competitive athletes pursue the dream of having the top step on the podium and having the brightest medal around our neck, it's really important to also keep that in perspective. We're so fortunate to be alive and to be healthy and to be able to have the strength to navigate the setbacks and the bridges that you fall off of. That keep that perspective.
Beautiful.
It's a great
Well,
way to end.
I am going to embrace the day and the time that we've gotten to spend with you. It's been just very, very inspiring. And
well, thank you.
yeah,
I've been so
grateful.
enjoyed the podcast series, and it was actually delightful that we could work this out, that I could contribute as well.
I
Yeah,
can't wait for our
Jeffrey.
listeners to hear it.
Yeah, I can't either. I so appreciate you taking the time to be with us and share your very unique and beautifully articulated perspective. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right.
All right.
So take care.
All right,
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Takeaways, takeaways, takeaways. We've heard from you that your favorite section of our podcast is the takeaways. Thank you so much for that feedback. But before we get to the takeaways today, we wanted to ask you if you would please give us a 5-star review. That way, more people will be able to find our podcast. Also, if you could subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify, you'll never miss a podcast episode if you subscribe. And please share our podcast with your friends. And now, the takeaways.
Well, Maria, oh gosh, it's our first cyclist, right? A pure cyclist that we've had other than you. And what an inspiring story. I mean, I was just choked up a couple of times and just an inspiration. So many takeaways, just lots to take away there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jeffrey's my friend, and I've never heard him tell the story particularly this way, but he's, since I've known him for quite a while, I've understood, I know his background, but, it's just, he's just a beautiful person. And I think, it's nice to have, whenever we have an older guest on, I'm always glad because the perspective is completely different. I love the freshness of the younger athletes, but it's really interesting to hear, somebody who's been around the block a time or two.
Yes. And I'm going to start with my first takeaway, and it wasn't even discussed, but that's one of the things that I kind of alluded to in the podcast, that we like to see things in these champions that they may not even, that they're just doing automatically, that we can have a lesson from. And my first takeaway is just the incredible passion that Jeffrey has for life.
Yes.
For cycling, for growing his cucumbers, to his profession. And that it was contagious for me. And when you mentioned that this is an older athlete, and that says it even more, that it's
Right.
easy to be passionate about your sport when you're a 21-year-old Olympian. I mean,
That's a good
but
point. That's a good point.
Can you?
Yeah, he has a youthful passion, doesn't he?
Oh my gosh, he's kept this passion for decades, and it's still
Right.
it's still as palpable and strong as ever. So my first takeaway is that passion, and he wears it on his sleeve. You know, he's so passionate about what's happened in his life and where he's going and what he's doing that he's emotional. And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that passion is a trait of people who are successful, and you've got to have passion towards it. Gets you up in the morning. It gets you through hard workouts. It's huge, and he's got it big time. So that was my first takeaway.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's true. His passion is just barely below, his skin level. It comes out. That's really an excellent point, Kelly. And I think that it is true that to have success, you've got to feel that. Okay, so Jeffrey is a fellow endurance cyclist, so he's used a lot of the same tools and tricks that I have. But one of the things that he said that I always just go, was basically that when it's hard to see the big goal because of discomfort or suffering or something's been moved, for instance, during the pandemic or whatever, that you need to focus on small goals. And I truly, truly live this every day and believe this, that especially when times are tough, you just look and take the next right step and you do the next right thing, and you get on the bike today, you lace up your shoes today, you go to the workout room today, or you put down the glass of wine today. You do one right thing, the next right thing, and there's no question that you have to have big goals, and that big goals are inspiring, but big goals can seem very far away. And if you can just work that process and try to do the right thing today, then you're going to succeed. So I was glad that he mentioned that.
That is a trait of champions that we keep seeing. And I don't think you can ever remind yourself enough about the biggest, the longest journey starts with one step. You can eat a whole elephant one bite at a time, just small goals. I love it.
Yeah, it sounds so, overused, but people forget that it's really what I do it's what I do right now after we get off this podcast or doing this podcast. It's what, it's the next thing that you're doing that's building your tomorrow and your success next week, next month, next year.
So yes, Maria, those are our great first takeaways. My second one, and I wanted to address the not anything new, but certainly a little different twist on the willingness to expose yourself to suffering. So this is an interesting one, which I think is a trait that champions share. And I wanted to touch on this one because I think it's okay, and that you can still be a champion without the willingness to suffer, but maybe not in endurance athletics. So that's where I bring in your husband, who was told Jeffrey in the pits, just gut it out. And your
hilarious.
husband has done a lot, but I want to bring in my husband.
Oh, sure. He knows how to suffer.
He knows how to
Absolutely.
suffer. But my husband is not willing to suffer. He just, it's an interesting thing. He's a great athlete. But longer endurance events they're just not for everyone. And yet, if you're going to do endurance, yes, you need to suffer. But I don't think that all athletes need to suffer. What do you think of that?
I completely agree. I think that those of us, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. I'll speak for myself. I think that I am good at endurance events because I have this willingness to be uncomfortable for long periods of time. I'm not sure I would be able to be successful outside of that. I mean, so that's a gift, just like, a slow twitch, fast twitch. Jim, who can do endurance events and does well at them, is so much better at a sprint than I am. We talk about it all the time. He just doesn't even feel the discomfort till later. and I try to recruit those big muscles and I just giggle because they're just not there. So I agree with you that you can absolutely be a champion without that suffer gene, but you have to be willing to, to be disciplined, which is probably different.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I just wanted to touch on that as a thing. So what was your second takeaway?
Oh, the second one, Jeffrey is so positive and optimistic, and and has carried that through, his trials, his broken neck, through, he mentioned that he's been fired. I'm sure he's had way more challenges than I even have heard about or know about, but his optimism, I will ride again. I will do this. I'm just going to keep on going. His optimism in life. I've never heard him be pessimistic. He has told me stories about being depressed and being sad, but I think those were just the things that he did before he got busy,
right.
Changing things for himself. So I think an optimism is something. It's kind of like competitiveness. I think a lot of people would say, well, you're either optimistic or you're not when you're born. But I truly believe that you can become more optimistic if you work on it. If you work on gratitude and seeing, the positive in things. We know the studies are there. You live longer, you're sharper, you can learn better. You're just better at everything if you can be optimistic. And again, Jeffrey has that quality, in bucketfuls.
Yes, I think that's a huge part of his success. He just sees the glass as half full, and
right,
and that's a trait that is important, and I think it's a trait we can acquire. Just flip it around when you start to think of something in a negative light. Just reframe it. So I love that. That. Well, Maria, what an inspiration! What a great show, and we'd love to hear from our listeners about what they thought of that show, because it was just unusual.
It was a little bit of different for us.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to get some feedback on whether listeners like that kind of thing.
Yeah, easy to email us at hello@championsmojo.com.
Okay, Kelly, I love you. Have a great day.
Love you too, Maria. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This week's quote of the week comes from Muhammad Ali. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion.
You've been listening to the Champions Mojo podcast with host Kelly Palace and Maria Parker. Champions Mojo is produced by Cabra Media, and a new episode debuts every Tuesday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. Follow Champions Mojo on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @Champions Mojo.